Partner, what's up? You don't want to actively kill yourself, and you find fantasizing about dying comforting. So this video is going to cover an article that I found particularly meaningful that stood out in this past semester about a subject that I think is even stigmatized in mental health. It's suicide, and particularly suicide ideation. So in the video, we're going to go over the article Out of the Tunnel by Bill O'Hanlon, Escaping the Trance of Depression. I went through, kind of skimmed through, read the article, and highlighted some things in an attempt to try to focus. And then in the end, I'll go over a couple resources, prevention hotlines, both in the States and internationally, as well as I'll just review what will be in the description box below. And if I have time, I'll briefly share some experiences as well. So, again, that's the name of the article. So there is, he talks about state-dependent learning. And I'll say this, Bill O'Hanlon is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as far as I know, for over 20 years. So state-dependent learning is based on the idea that our brains associate certain memories with specific environments, sensory experiences, smells, tastes, sounds. So saying if you're studying in a blue room, you're likely to recall the studied material if you take the test in a blue room. So very simple, the brain works with association. Now, one thing that happens though with problem talk, and a recent study, and this article is from 2015, I believe, shows that extensive discussion of problems, encouragement of problem talk, rehashing the details of problems, speculating about problems, and dwelling on negative effects leads to significant increase in the stress hormone cortisol, which predicts increased depression and anxiety over time. So obviously, doing depression, feeling it over and over again. So O'Hanlon talks about marbling in the article. His father was in the meat industry, and basically just these times where there was exceptions to the depressed times and experiences that would not just evoking and deepening depression, but avoid. So they're kind of like having those exceptions to it. Now, he also goes on to say, or talks about in the book Darkness Visible. There's a quote here I want to share. Darkness Visible by William Straiton, who almost killed himself while going through a serious depression because he thought he'd convinced that he'd never come out of the painful state. Put it this way after he recovered. Mysterious in its coming, mysterious in its going, the affliction runs its course and one finds peace. But in the middle of it, one often forgets that there's any other place or any experience other than unremitting bleakness and pain. It can be a lifetime to people in the midst of depression to have even a glimpse of the possibility that there will be experiences outside depression. So, then goes on. There's an example of a client, Cindy, who is spinning her wheels, says, with a therapist, gets stuck into severe depression, stop functioning, quit her job, and become dependent on the therapist. And the therapist would say, I feel like Cindy is sucking the marrow out of my bones. So finding out what brought her to therapy, asking questions like that, and finding out more about the depressive episodes in comparison. So the article, and I won't go into all the details, although it's not that long, but just comparing what Cindy did in contrast to the times where she was depressed to wasn't. So for example, during her depressed time, she stayed in bed until noon, got up but stayed up in her night clothes, sat in her living room, ate breakfast cereals all day, did nothing, talked only to her therapist and one male friend, working, beginning to feel depressed, went to lunch alone, took a shower, got dressed in the evening. Now, during the competent times, Cindy showered, got up at 9 a.m., went to work, met a friend, did or played music, spent time with girlfriends, give herself credit for big or small accomplishments. And then the phrase, they talked about the phrase depresso land and contrast it with confidence, competent land. And she got a kick out of naming that, so that's another thing, just as far as like really, being empowering by owning it. And there's another book in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Author Robert Pirsig said that when an artist draws a tree, he doesn't draw the branches and the leaves. Instead, as he draws the spaces between the branches and the leaves, a picture of the tree emerges. And they talk about, Oceania said this resonates with me because that's what I do when approaching depression, interested in discovering non-depressive thoughts. That way, learning about the person's abilities, their competence, and good feelings. So now I'm going to get into some approaches and things in a second here. There's 3 techniques, but one last section here is the 1 foot in. Just talking about how it's this delicate balance, like working with people in depression. So if you're watching this, you struggle with depression. Even if you work with people with depression, you may struggle with depression throughout your life. I know that's something for me. So think of having 1 foot in their experience and 1 foot out, calling this acknowledgement and possibility. So when people don't feel heard, understood, or validated, they often appear resistant. So that's really important. As people, we want to be heard. We don't want to just be, just diagnosed, completely seen as like a scientific project. Let's see here. I'm also sorting through what I've highlighted. Okay, so here's a good one. So there's a client that this therapist saw who'd come in. I think this is Ohanan. I had a client who had, early in my psychotherapy career, came in, soaked up the kindness, unconditional regard, and during the 20-second session, saying to himself, "So you're depressed again this week," and realized that it wasn't helping her. And that's when he began to study Milton Erickson. And I'll put a link for Milton Erickson below because he references Milton quite a bit. There's a really powerful Abraham Lincoln thing here I learned about the president that illustrates the deft combination of joining and inviting. Who's actually, Lincoln suffered from a lifelong tendency towards depression and melancholy days. He had 2 major depressive episodes. He found out that Fanny McCullen, the young adult daughter of one of the generals who'd been killed during the Civil War, had fallen into depression that was lasting longer than usual. So here's what I want to read, this excerpt from Lincoln. So, "Dear Fanny, it is with deep grief that I learn of the death of your kind and brave father, and especially that it is affecting your young heart beyond what is common in such cases. In this sad world of ours, sorrow comes to all, and to the young it comes with bitterest agony because it takes them unawares. The older have learned to ever expect it. I am anxious to afford some alleviation of the present distress. Perfect relief is not possible except with time. You cannot now realize that you will ever feel better. Is this not so? And yet it is a mistake. You are sure to be happy again. To know this, which is certainly true, will make you some less miserable now. I have had experiences enough to know what I say, and you need only believe it to feel better at once." Okay, so jumping right into the 3 techniques to acknowledgement of possibility. So reflecting in past tense. So these are techniques of dealing with depression, and we're going to get to suicidality, ideation. So saying, "I don't want to see anymore." If someone says that, you may respond, "You haven't wanted to see anyone." Or, "I don't want to see anyone," I'm sorry. So you may respond, "You haven't wanted to see anyone." The person may say, "I'm suicidal." And response could be, "You've thought seriously about killing yourself." So there's a noticing of reflection in the past tense. Reflecting. So another one is, depressed person might say, "I'm afraid I'll never come out of this darkness." Responses could be, "You've been really afraid. You've been feeling pretty discouraged. You've been worried you'll never feel better." A depressed person may say, "Nothing will help." Could also say, "Nothing has helped. You've tried a lot of things and haven't felt better. You've been thinking that nothing will help." So global to partial reflections, just going from always to never, and being in recovery. This is something that came up a while back, was just this, and it's still patterns that I have, is to use very language on kind of binary spectrums of like always and never, like extremes, I should say. So instead of that, implementing, usually, typically, almost never, very few people, and to help people feel understood. So to make them less global. So lately, recently, these days, so these are ways to kind of change it. And quantity, say most, very few, almost everyone, little. So an example, if the depressed person says nothing is helping, you might respond with, you've tried most everything, and you've tried most everything and it hasn't worked much. So some of these do get tricky because they become invalidating at some point, and I think the article gets in there. I don't think I passed it yet, but it might be this next section. So it's validating perceptions but not unchanging the truth or reality. So people often have this unrealistic, pessimistic view of life when they're in this depression or suicidality state of mind. So agreeing with the pessimistic view may further discourage them, but we can't just dismiss it. So finding this crucial balance. So doing this using the phrase such as your sense, as far as you can see, as far as you remember, the only way to handle this in your view, and so on. So a depressed person may say, I'll never get better. Possible responses are, you think you won't get better. Your sense is that there's not much hope. As far as you can tell, nothing's been working and you're afraid nothing will. So combining all three, and this is where, this is some powerful stuff here. So you can say, if the person says, I've just got to kill myself, I can't take this anymore, or if you're feeling this, you could use all three techniques in your response by saying, so you've really been so discouraged lately and suffering so much that killing yourself seems the best possibility for relief right now. Now, this is where if the person feels invalidated, you may want to switch to a technique. So, for example, suppose the person says, I can't get up and get going, and you use a particular reflection to say, sometimes getting going is really hard for you. What do you do if the person comes back and says, not sometimes, every damn time, you don't get it, do you? So, and then you could say, sorry, I didn't mean to minimize the struggle with this, and you're right, I probably don't fully get how things are. So your sense is that you can't get going pretty much these days. And the person may say then, well, on the days I see you, I manage to get up, but other days it just feels too hard. So that's kind of ways to stay close while introducing small openings. Now, inclusion, and we're a little over halfway through the article here. I see we're at 12 minutes. We're going to try to get moving so this isn't too long. This is just important stuff here too, though. I found it pretty important. Hopefully it's useful to someone or some people. So inclusion is another method. Have you ever had a client come into your office and say something like, I can't go on, I have to kill myself, and in the back saying, well, wait a minute, why did this person bother to get up, get dressed, put on makeup or comb just to tell me they're going to die, right? And that's not to invalidate that, this doesn't take away from a person's plan, right? So if someone says this, it's not to invalidate them because they may have a plan when they go home. So we want to take it seriously at the same time. But it's just, just kind of putting some of the dots together. So the sense is, even if the person has decided to kill themselves, there's another aspect that hopes that coming to see me will change their mind. And there's a really interesting study about the Golden Gate Bridge people intending suicide, and the research was that something that might help them identify risk to prevent future suicides. They found one commonality among the survivors, that on the way down from the bridge to the frigid waters below, almost all of them had some variation on the thought, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, which indicates that very few people are 100% hopeless, and even the moments before their imminent death or ambivalent when things have gone so far. So permission. And this, to me, is probably one of the most powerful things in this article. I started this. So permission. And this is, one way to help them is that with this, so let me just make sure I don't want to miss this important line. So that just people aren't wrong to have these ideas. I guess this is a way to start here. One way to help people with this sense of wrongfulness is to give them permission to feel, be, or think the way they do. So very simple in concept. This permission to and permission not to are the two types of permission. And the permission giving takes the permission off the hook for the person off the hook for being wrong and not feeling or thinking that they're doing something that they should stop trying to do or feeling something that they can't even readily stop. So you wouldn't say to someone, I wouldn't say to someone, it's okay to kill yourself, but instead it's not unusual for people feeling as bad as you do to think about killing themselves. Or so there's it's okay to think that. It doesn't mean that you'll act on it. So there's no permission for self-harm actions, things like that. So really powerful example too, where if a therapist, and this is if you are training as a therapist or if you're a client, things to honestly be watchful of. If you've got a therapist that is handling suicide ideation in this way, it may be a red flag for you, that it may not be a good fit. So we've got Mary admitted to the therapist that she had misery, considered suicide every day, and her previous therapist had known about it, given the fact that she thought about suicide for 10 years and never acted on it, but really considered it an issue, but hadn't considered it an issue. And the new therapist, trained on the latest standards and concerns of liability, told her that, she'd want to do a suicide contract agreeing that she wouldn't kill herself, and she'd inform immediately, or if she felt she couldn't keep the contract, she'd inform immediately. It could be committed to a psych hospital. And this is common, suicide contracts, standard, where there's an agreement, and in this case it's a cover your ass thing for the therapist. I'm not saying that the therapists don't care, but that's what this is. So in this case, the client reluctantly signed it, and she actually now felt compelled to kill herself right away because it was a way that Mary had control, and the control was taken from her, basically. And basically, she told the new therapist that this was an escape hatch if things got too bad, because she had found a new therapist. And at this point, and I think that might have been O'Hannon, I told her that since she'd been suicidal for 10 years and hadn't acted on it, there was no need for anything. He wasn't worried about it. So she had permission to have suicide as an option, not permission to kill herself. So again, a difference, and not having to feel any other way. So wrapping up, we've got inclusion of opposites. Is this another section? Someone may feel like dying but also want to live. May feel like killing himself but not want to hurt his family and friends by killing himself. A person may consider himself optimistic but also pessimistic, generous and selfish, or sane and crazy. There's lots of these things. So it's important to recognize these paradoxes, that you can be hopeless and have hope at the same time. And this is where the conjunction and comes in instead of but. So, you felt as if you couldn't get out of bed today, and you got up and came to see me. You wanted to give up and you wanted to keep going. You feel as if there's no end in this, and you think you'll come out of it. You're down on yourself and you have compassion for yourself. You can't find your sense of meaning, and you think you're going through this depression for a reason. You don't want her to leave you alone, and you don't want her with you because you feel so ashamed and non-responsive. You can't sleep and you're exhausted. You don't want to die, and you don't want to live like this. So you don't want to actively kill yourself, and you find fantasizing about dying comforting. So that's where that came from. So finally, with these oxymorons, it's important to remember, this is another quote I liked, it's important to remember to forget certain things and not to forget to remember other things. I'll say that again. It's important to remember to forget certain things and not to forget to remember other things. So just an example of oxymorons here. It seems that you've spent so much time in darkness that your eyes have adjusted and can see things in the dark that others can't. That's a powerful one too. You're hoping against hope that your depression will lift. So Milton Erickson also told O'Hanlon, if you can't say the no, the patient has to say it. So you're kind of asking these leading questions where you don't think you'll get better, do you? You're not feeling better, are you? You're starting to feel better, aren't you? And this has to do, he relates it to the Asian symbol of the yin and the yang, the yes and the no. And then last thing too is, someone may say, I feel like I'm falling through the floor and there's no bottom, I just keep falling. So a response could be, you haven't found the bottom of the bottom, or you're afraid things will get worse without stopping, and you're hoping we'll find a way to stop your descent. Is that not right? right? So it's kind of, making that translation and checking in that it's been translated right. So exceptions is actually, I think, the actual last section here, and just talks about, 20 minutes is perfect. I'll brief through this. It just talks about no energy, getting out of bed. Clients, sometimes I feel so hopeless, I don't know if I'll ever come out. Maybe getting this new job, my old job sucked. So when you're afraid you won't come out, it seems hopeless, but you think about the new job, you get a sense of hope. And there's lots of therapeutic models that use exceptions, narrative therapy, I think solution focus, and then probably like bunches and bunches more. So there's more quotes. I won't read all of them here that I've marked, but there's other things here like, have you been able to go to work to visit friends when some people with depression haven't been able to do those things? Or what stopped you from acting on those suicidal thoughts? Why haven't you given up on seeking help? So these things answer to these, contribute to like this marbling that they talks about. What happens? So you could say you've been through these times. Saying, I'm curious, you've been through these times of depression before and have come out of them. What happens when you start to emerge from the darkness and begin to feel better? There was another one here. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yes, okay. Last one that this section was, I was a little surprised to hear that you finished that big project at work, even though I know you've been feeling like hell. If I were talking with someone else who was depressed and had a similar kind of project in front of them, what would I tell them about how you were able to pull that off, even though you felt so impaired? So depression as a bad trance means, your eyes are closed. This was a really cool concluding section. There was a thing where even like the meaning of words don't really matter. We talked about, wartime, this symptom trance, and this person was saying in French, your eyes are closing, so tis you, I don't forget how you say closing, but the person actually said your nostrils are closing. The person found out later, and really, I think it just talks about the power of the trance, which kind of brings back to the start of what the name of the article is. And depression also is a trance, and only the trance is not a healing trance. It's not a therapeutic one, but a depression trance, so which induces more and more depression as it's repeated. And marbling can be valuable in breaking this. And so this was a great article. I personally will share a few resources here and then get into my own story briefly, and really brief here. So this came from Out of the Blue, 6 Non-Medical Ways to Relieve Depression by Bill O'Hanlon. And then I'll link as much of this as I can in the box below. And then also there'll be a link below for international, for Bill O'Hanlon's, his website, the International Association for Suicide Prevention Hotline, and it has Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, Oceania, which I found out was also, that's Australia and the outsiding islands, I think, and then South America. The book Out of the Blue, I'll link that as well, and then Milton Erickson, and obviously I don't have it here, but the actual National Suicide Prevention Hotline with the phone number, which is 1-800-273-8255. That's in the US, but anyone can call. So real brief, I'll just 1 or 2 minutes. The reason this article stuck out is this is something that I've struggled with. Suicide ideation has been a tool that I've found really helpful throughout my life. It's not something I use every day, but it has, I think at times when the emotional pain has gotten so high, it's happened. It's happened as a grad student. It's happened many times beforehand in life, and I understand and can relate to that comfort. So that can come with that, So there's a real comfort that comes in having power and control. So, if you're watching this and something you've struggled with, I would say that you're not crazy. And I think we need to have this conversation out in the open, because I think a lot of people would relate to it, and it's not something we should stigmatize, that people should have that autonomy of thought in that way, and we can still ensure that people are safe, so making that differentiation. So thanks for watching. Thank you all for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you aren't subscribed already, make sure you do so. If you want to see more of these videos you can explore on the channel, and then help us grow the community for sharing diverse and intersectional content by liking and sharing the videos. It helps it show up in suggestions for other people, and please comment below for future ideas. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time. Peace.